Before we start today's show, I wanted to let you know that my new book, The Sound of Violet, will be coming out on September 21st. You can pre-order the book now, and if you do, you'll get a sneak preview of the trailer for the upcoming movie that's based on the book. Also, Premier Collectibles is offering a limited number of signed copies of the novel. You can find out about those and how to see the trailer for the movie by going to thesoundofviolet.com. That's thesoundofviolet.com. Thanks for your support and enjoy today's show. Welcome to the Navigating Hollywood podcast. My name is Alan Wolf, and I'm a filmmaker, author, and game creator. Today, we have a very, very special guest. His name is James R. Fitzgerald, and he's a retired special agent with the FBI, a criminal profiler, forensic linguist, author, and more. Have I forgotten anything?
You demoted me. I was a supervisory special agent, but that's okay.
Oh my gosh, even better. He is our first guest who has his own miniseries made about his life. Amazing. Sam Worthington played Jim in the miniseries Manhunt, Unabomber, made on the Discovery Channel, which is available on Netflix. The series shows how Jim helped identify and track down the Unabomber, who is portrayed by Paul Bettany in the show. Is that why Jim is a very, very special guest? Oh no, it goes way beyond that. Is it because Jim has worked on many high-profile cases, such as the 2001 anthrax attacks or the DC sniper? No. Is it because he has appeared in numerous television shows, was the host on Killer Profile on A&E, and been an advisor for the TV series Criminal Minds? Oh no. Here's the reason why Jim is a very, very special guest. Are you ready? Jim is my uncle on my late father's side.
And not just any uncle.
That's right. Most people will be surprised at that news. I myself was surprised when I discovered Jim is my uncle in January 2018. More details about how I found out. I have a whole new family I never knew about a little later in the podcast. But first, welcome, Uncle Jim.
It's great to be here, Nephew Alan. I'll drop the nephew from this point on.
Okay.
It is absolutely great to be here. Thank you for the invite, and I'm looking forward to having a chat today.
Oh, me too. Well, you have such an incredible story. You have worked on some of the highest profile criminal cases in the history of the United States. And you've lectured, you've written books. You also have 3 sons, my cousins. I'm so curious, did they get away with anything while they were growing up?
Well, you're not the first one to ask that.
Really?
Usually my kids are present when they're asked. And they wouldn't be so honest in their teens and early 20s. But now that they're older than that, I start hearing things. Oh, well, that one time, Dad, yeah, you were asleep and we blah, blah, blah. Nothing major, of course. But I hear a few different stories coming out from Sean, Dan, and Ryan now when they feel the statute of limitations has in fact expired on what can get them in trouble.
That's
A couple of times, wait a minute, you really did that? You told me? Hey, Dad, what can I say? But of course, I probably did the same thing with my dad, your grandfather.
Right.
Who I know you never met,
Yes.
but that's what kids and parents do. I always told them from their earliest days, this applies, I think, in most of life, most politicians and law enforcement, doctors, occasional podcast hosts, they get in trouble when they lie. Just tell the truth, what happened, get it out of your system. You may take a hit or two, but, don't play this game and, it wasn't my Twitter feed. Someone hacked it, and we know. When does that ever really happen in life?
That's right.
So I taught my kids that at an early age. I learned it at an early age. And like I said, truthfulness is the best way to get through life.
Good advice. Now, Manhunt Unabomber, I loved it. It's a terrific miniseries on Netflix. What was it like seeing your life portrayed in a miniseries?
It was very surreal. It is really strange to see, first of all, to read a script about your life. And I would go back and forth with the head writer, the director. Well, this didn't happen at all. This happened sort of this way, but maybe we can compromise a little bit. And they did make some changes. Everything was filmed in Atlanta, so nothing happened either in Philly, where I grew up, or Quantico or San Francisco. But that's all right. That's Hollywood. That's how movies work. But to just watch Sam, who I think did a really good job portraying me. He did his best. He had a dialect coach. He's Australian. My favorite thing I did with Sam, he's portraying me, and he's about 3/4 of the way through the shoot. And I'm watching him through the monitor, and finally they break from that scene. If they're doing it 5 times or so, Sam comes over, and the director finally introduces us. And of course, he goes right from Philly English to Australian English. Good day, mate. How are you? I know, poor imitation. But, nice to meet you, Fitz. Oh, hey, Sam, nice to meet you. Good job so far. And, well, I wanted to ask you, Fitz, how are you seeing me so far? And you read the scripts? You heard what I'm doing here? I said, Sam, one big problem throughout the whole series. And he's, what's that, mate? And I said, you're wearing your gun on the right side. I'm a lefty.
Oh, no.
And he stands back for a few seconds. He goes, oh, mate, you were pulling my leg. And because he had to do a lot of writing on whiteboards and blackboards, whatever.
Wow.
And he couldn't fake writing with his left hand. So I said, all right, no big deal. We lefties are conscious of that, though. So really, the one big thing from a personality perspective was that, which is very minor. But I have friends from high school, and even before that, grade school, that they saw the series, and I really hadn't seen some of them in years. Fitz, this guy, Sam Worthington, he did such a great job portraying you. He has all your nuances, all your intonations down. I said, well, okay, I'm not sure it was, 100% there, but they thought he did it well, and I appreciated that. I think Sam did do a good job. Of course, there are composite characters. There's compressed time. There are, fictionalized versions for plot line, for plot stories. You've written books, you directed and produced movies. Alan, you know how that goes, but especially with a true story. There's a few things in the series that didn't actually happen, which is why I did my audiobook, The Fitz Files, Manhunt, Unabomber. So that can clear all those things up for people really into the miniseries and the Unabomber case.
Can you tell us the plot of the miniseries for people who aren't familiar with the Unabomber?
Sure. First of all, Unabomber is an acronym standing for University Airline Bombings. That was an early term coined by some unnamed FBI bureaucrat. FBI loves to give sort of nicknames to its big investigations. So that was Unabomber. It was coined well before I was even in the Bureau in the early 80s. And basically what it was concerned a 17-year bombing campaign by an unknown person who'd either places IEDs, improvised explosive devices, or towards the latter part of his career, send them through the mail. He almost brought down a commercial airliner. It did explode at a certain altitude as he set the altimeter. Fortunately, emergency landing, no one died there. He wound up killing 3 people and injuring about 2 dozen, some of them very seriously, with missing limbs and fingers and things like that. And he was just an unknown. Nobody knew who he was, what he was about, what the purpose was behind this. So he started in 78. Then in 1993, after a 6-year sort of dark period on the Unabomber's part, he started bombing again. And that's when he started writing letters to the New York Times saying, we are FC, we have this message. If you publish this article, the manifesto we came to call it, we will cease and desist from bombing, except for purposes of sabotage. He always kept that little back door open.
In the miniseries, they showed your character having issues and conflicts with his wife and not having the greatest work-life balance. Was any of that true for you?
Yeah, I mean, being separated from one's family is always difficult. I mean, my boys then were 16, 13, and little Ryan was barely 2. It was difficult. I'd just been promoted to Quantico, and after I went through 12 weeks of training there, they asked me, which in the FBI, when they ask you something, they're sort of telling you something. They said, we kind of need you for 30 days in San Francisco to work on the Unabomber case, and 30 days, that's it, San Fran? Well, I guess I can do that. But 30 days turned into a year and a half on and off. It was tough to be away from the family. It did cause some problems. We tried our best to work through things there, but ultimately it was agreed. My then wife and I did go our separate ways, but we stayed, believe it or not, friendly, and the raising of our 3 sons was certainly paramount to us from that point and our whole relationship, but certainly just as much so even after we separated and divorced.
When you look back, do you think to yourself, oh, I wish I had done X differently? Or did you feel like there was just an unbalance that was happening?
But any kind of a split, I think, always intensifies issues within a family. I'm also trying to catch a serial bomber, but number one in my life to this day, even though they're all grown adults, it is my kids. It did create some problems, and their mother, she agreed with me going first to Quantico, me just moving there, them not moving from the Philly area, and then me being sent to San Fran. But it just made some problems difficult along the way.
You were trying to catch a serial killer and just thinking, I mean, the pressure that must have been on you and the sacrifices that you had to make because of someone who's going around and killing people. I mean, it's incredible to think what that must have felt like.
Yeah, and it wasn't just me. I mean, I was assigned to the Unabomber task force. I think there were about 100 people between agents and support people, other agencies involved at any given time. But they decided early on that, I'm the guy. I came to them. I pointed out some linguistic feature that no one had seen before in one of the early Unabomber letters. And basically the big boss said, hey, I like this. Fitz, how about we put you in charge of all the documents in this case? And this is before any Ted Kaczynski was known or anyone like that. We did have some other suspects early on. People don't understand that when the manifesto was finally published in September of 95, after that, we had about 2,500 suspects, some named, some described, some in the country, some out of the country, a lot of wives calling about their ex-husbands, a lot of people calling in about their lawyers and mailmen or anything like that. And we had to track everyone down. So finally, in February of 96, we get a call from a lawyer who's representing a man who thinks his brother may be the Unabomber. There was one more lead we had to check out. And of course, once we did, and once we started getting writings of David Kaczynski's brother, Ted Kaczynski, we then knew we had our guy.
And you said that you brought something new to the FBI. Can you describe what that is?
I was really the first one to take language evidence, the content, the structure, the syntax, the style features used, and compare them and actually put it into an affidavit for a search warrant. And it was the first time this kind of language evidence was ever used in the U.S. to attain a search warrant. We didn't quite have enough for an arrest warrant for Kaczynski, but definitely enough for a search warrant for his 10-foot by 12-foot cabin in Lincoln, Montana. Once we got in the door, of course, it was a treasure trove of bombing equipment and materials, as well as handwritten documents all tied into the manifesto and whatever. So we knew once we had that evidence out of the cabin that we were going to convict this guy. And he wound up pleading guilty, of course.
You also worked on the anthrax attacks of 2001. Can you describe what that was like?
Sure. And if anyone recalls, if they're old enough, 9/11 happened, of course, September of 2001. And then within a few weeks, we have these letters going to different parts of the country. Then there was a second batch of letters in mid-October, and people are dying from this powder. The sender is not hiding what it is in the envelopes with this very finely weaponized white powder. In biowarfare terms, highly weaponized mean, number one, very toxic, but number two, very small. The more microscopic you can make a powder, but yet it still have its effectiveness, the smaller the better. So it was actually leaking out of the envelopes that the guy actually put tape around the corners and the seal to keep it in. So here I am, a few years off the Unabomber case, some other cases I worked with language. I did some media work back then, and they wanted me to look at these letters. The first letter, I think, had 19 words in it. My bosses at FBI headquarters, they said, can you give us a forensic linguistic analysis of this? I said, wait a minute, I had 35,000 words in the Unabomber case. That's just the manifesto alone. I have 19 words, and what do you want from this? But actually, there was envelopes involved, and I went on, I think, the Today Show, Time Magazine interviewed me, and a few other media outlets. And I did my best to say, well, if you see an envelope that looks like this, if you see some of these features in here that look like this, let me know. Remember the anthrax mailer, he used dashes between his dates. So it was 09-011-01. So I said, hey, if you know someone who writes letters, who writes dates and uses dashes, call the FBI. And it turns out there were some false leads that came up, which I had nothing to do with. There was a poor guy, a former biochemist that worked for the military, but he was considered a suspect. They searched his house. They drained a lake near where he lived. And we profilers all along said, we don't think it's him. It's not him.
Wow.
And they said, thank you, profilers. We don't need you anymore.
Oh, gosh.
We were right. He wound up suing. He wound up getting all kinds of a big payment out of it. And then finally they got rid of that task force, put another one together, and eventually a person was identified in 2007. He was contacted in 2008 and wound up killing himself. His name was Bruce Ivins, and he wound up killing himself before he would come into the system. When I worked for Criminal Minds, there was an episode called Amplification. Every script would be sent to me. I'd look at it, not for editing purposes, whatever, but for technical purposes, FBI language, criminal language. And they sent me something. The Hotch and the team walk into this command post. Hey, the FBI here is great. Come on in. And I said, well, wait a minute now. In real life, there'd be some acrimony. There'd be some issues back and forth because of what happened with identifying this wrong person. So I had them rewrite that part of the script. I mean, all I could do is suggest. I'm the technical advisor. So I said, hey, how about having the profilers walk in and the snarky army commander look at them and say, oh, great, the FBI's here. You guys did a great job on the last one, didn't you? Referring to the actual anthrax case. And I had him write in. Hotch goes right into the camera. No, the profilers had it right. We never said it was him. Oh yeah, that's correct. All right, come on, guys, come on in. And I was so proud of that moment.
Yeah, so you're able to kind of plant in a hidden message there.
Well, it wasn't hidden to anyone in the FBI who knew how they screwed up.
Right.
And we kept telling them, no, it's not him. It's not him.
Right.
It's someone like him, but blah, blah, blah. So right before season 9, I helped co-create. Actually, I created the character of Alex Blake. She was a linguist FBI profiler who they had met my partner, Natalie Schilling, who's a Georgetown professor of linguistics. They met her because I brought her out a few times to the show. And they knew I worked the Unabomber case. So they hired Jean Triplehorn as the new profiler on the show. I mean, she was the actress. Her name was Alex Blake. And she was a kind of a combination of me and Natalie. Kind of didn't make too much sense. She was a full-time professor of linguistics at Georgetown, but also would run out and handle these bizarre, serial murder cases at the drop of a hat or a phone call. So it was kind of fun having her. We met her for the first time at the 200th episode party in Las Vegas. They threw, and we walked over, and whoever introduced us, here's Fitz and Natalie. You're kind of both of them. You're based on both of them. She goes, hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. My Criminal Minds baby is Jean Triplehorn. So very nice person, great actor. And she did 2 years on the show. That worked for her. Then other people came in.
What advice would you have for writers who are writing about crime or writing about some of the situations that you're familiar with for them to be authentic?
I think a lot of writers we were finding over the years, they were borrowing from the writer who wrote a police thing 10 years ago. That guy had borrowed from a writer from 10 years before that, and it went back and back. To a lot of writers and production companies and networks' credit, they are bringing in real-life experts in their field. Maybe they're doctors, maybe they're lawyers, but in this case, law enforcement. I'm affiliated with XG Productions in LA. We lend ourselves to these different companies, documentaries, whatever. Either we'll be on the air talking about a series of crimes or profiles, or in my case, linguistic analysis, or we're behind the scenes and we're advising them. So I would say read some biographies or true crime books, perhaps written by the actual people. Do your share of research. Talk to some real law enforcement people. Maybe they're not allowed to talk to you if they're still on the job, but there's plenty of retired people out there. And there are entire production companies developed just to kind of help to keep it real in Hollywood and in books.
Are there times during your career when you had a big hunch about something and it turned out to be right or terribly wrong?
I think the biggest hunch I got right, in a way, had to do with the DC sniper case. I was giving a tour of the FBI Academy that day, and I just finished the tour with a number of journalists and their spouses, about maybe 8 people altogether. And we walk into the lobby, they're going to turn their badges back in, and there's the TV on, whatever news channel it was. And it's, headlines and, 6 shootings, Montgomery County, Maryland, which of course is just north of DC. And like within an hour, 6 seemingly random people shot by unknown person who got away. And these journalists all come to me, Fitz, you're the profiler, you're the expert. What happened here? I said, I don't know. I'm hearing this for the first time. I'm never one to just jump to conclusions because that's just a dangerous thing to do if you don't have the facts and the evidence. I said, I have a feeling I'm going to be involved in this case, but I don't know what's happened right here. We watched for a few more minutes. And the only thing I said to them, and they've repeated me this since then, how right I was, I did say to them, said, I don't know what's happening here. 1 person, 2 people, what the deal is. But I've been in cases before where there are multiple deaths, multiple murders, and all of them except one are collateral damage, quote unquote. The killer's purpose was really to take out one individual, but sort of mask it or camouflage it with taking out others at the same time, so they wouldn't become a suspect in that person's death. I wasn't right about that exact first day, but as it turns out with the DC sniper, they wound up killing 4 more people, injuring another half dozen, 10 dead total. I helped analyze the language in the writings, saying that it was most likely a black male, maybe one younger, maybe one older, based on language alone. But when they finally caught the guy, John Muhammad, who was the adult, John Muhammad didn't talk, but the young boy, Lee Boyd Malvo, finally told the investigators, well, John's plan all along was to kill all these random people and then find his ex-wife, kill her. That way he'd no longer have to pay alimony, child support, and he'd then have custody of his kids because he was allowed nowhere near his kids, but he still had to pay that money. So the whole purpose for the DC sniper case was to eventually kill his ex-wife. The last murder was of a bus driver. That was about 2 blocks from where she lived. Next week or 2, it would have been her. So my hunch, to use your word, back on that very first day where the 6 shootings occurred in Montgomery County, Maryland, was that it may be someone in this mix who was the actual intended target. The other ones meant to mask it. And it turns out it wasn't in that 6, but his ultimate goal was to have his ex-wife be one of the many killed. I've been very cautious and conservative. I don't go overboard. I don't jump to conclusions. I don't really think I've had any truly bad hunches. I'll contemplate a case and I'll get a yellow legal pad and I'll write down it could be, an unsolved crime. It could be this, could be this. Here's the motivation. This is the motivation. But usually within a few days, a few weeks, whatever, I'll start, ruling one or more out and take it from there. But I'm not being modest here. If you read my books, I've made mistakes in my time, but nothing where anyone was over falsely arrested or accused or anything like that.
If you could go back and relive any part of your FBI career, what would you do differently?
I can't think of too much I would do different. I wish somehow my marriage could have survived that whole thing. You reach a certain stage in life and you realize, I could have done this differently. I could have done that differently. But I wouldn't be the person I am today if perhaps I didn't suffer through some things there or have a minor issue with someone here. If you read my second book, there were 2 years in my police department that were hell. These miscreants were running the place. They got put in charge, politics. And it was a very difficult time in my life to the point that I was getting these constant headaches. I went to a neurologist thinking it may be something internal or actually something wrong with me. And nothing wrong with you. You have any stress in your life? Yeah. But I fought back and my side won, the good guys. And that whole administration was put asunder. And the good guys were back in charge. And I was kind of in a good place in 86, 87. But then the FBI finally opened up. I'm thinking, I'm a sergeant here. There's talk of me, being the next lieutenant. This chief may retire. I could maybe move up there. I said, I don't want to go through these last 2 years again. So I kind of went from being a big fish in a small pond to a small fish in a big pond going to the FBI. But I kind of got to be a decent sized fish in the FBI once I became a supervisor, profiler, helped solve the Unabomber case. I didn't do it by myself, but I was in charge of the language analysis, and it all came together really well for me.
During your career, you've studied mass murderers, rapists, killers, and beyond. How do you experience what you did and then move on with your day?
I just learned in my early days as a police officer to have a demarcation line in the brain. I used to use a signpost on my way home from work as a police officer. It was a short commute. And I said, at that signpost, I stopped thinking about work going home and start thinking about family stuff. On the way to work, I never stopped thinking about family stuff, but all right, focus on work now. You're at this milepost. In the FBI, I had a long commute back and forth from Bucks County, Pennsylvania to Lower Manhattan. So it was like exit, I think, 8 of the New Jersey Turnpike. I'd say, all right, work behind me, family stuff ahead of me. And that actually worked for me. And not always easy, of course. I would certainly not bring work stuff home, but I would keep any of the horrendous stuff or the graphic stuff to myself. I think that worked out for me in the long run. My kids have read my books or heard some of my podcasts. And you worked that case and you saw that kind of thing. You never told us that. I said, yeah, I know. You were young teens or whatever you were then, military people, in war zones see really bad stuff. And you absorb it, you take it in. Some people don't handle it as well as others. I get it. There's PTSD that kicks in from certain events. I mean, I've been on shooting scenes. I've been on, sexual assault scenes, little babies that didn't make it. And very tough. And even to this day, thinking of them, it's tough, but they're in a certain part of the brain that I kind of lock away. And I know it's there. It would help me react to something else that happened today if I had to think quick and take some kind of immediate response. But I purposely didn't share it with my loved ones, and it's worked for me.
Does it ever leak out in nightmares or in other ways?
I have a lot of dreams about I'm back as a Ben Salem police officer, or I'm back as an FBI agent. But it's not so much like gruesome crime scenes. And again, I've seen those. It's more like just a bizarre sort of interaction with current people in my life. Back when I was a kid, I used to have a dream that I would be in a fight and I would, be ready to go. My hands are up in front of me, but I just couldn't launch with the fist. It was like a sandbag, and it just went real soft. And the kid hits me and knocks me down. Of course, this is a dream. It didn't happen. And that never happened in real life, but that was a recurring dream. I become a police officer. A similar dream, but with sort of a different modality to it. And that is, I'm making an arrest. There's a guy pulling a gun on me, bank robber, whatever. I pull my gun out. I can't pull the trigger. So it switches from a punch from an arm to not being able to pull the trigger. And I mean, maybe that's a good thing, because as a police officer, you don't want to pull the trigger when you're not supposed to, but it can also get you killed. So,
do you think that was pointing out feeling powerless or anxiety?
I don't think it was a feeling of powerlessness, but maybe almost a hesitancy to release the power within me.
And with everything that you've seen, how has that impacted how you view the nature of people?
I can be a skeptic at times. I probably wasn't early on. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm a pretty good judge of character. I mean, I'm a profiler after all. But in your personal life, it gets a little more, complicated than that. Even when I was, after officially divorced and all, dating a little bit, now I'm dating for the first time in like 20 years. I remember telling people I could figure out what a terrorist is doing in the caves of Afghanistan better than I'm trying to figure out the woman I'm dating right now, because I was just so confused. And it wasn't even their fault. It's just like I'm re-entering a world that I was only in as a late teen, early 20 guy. And I said, what is she? She says this, but it seems she means that. But this terrorist somewhere in Afghanistan, I know what he'll do next. And I was usually right about that.
You've written 3 books about your life called A Journey to the Center of the Mind, with a 4th volume on the way. What inspired you to write those books?
People kept asking me questions about my life, my career. I just wanted to tell those stories and my police career, some fun arrests in there. If you're into true crime and police protocols and procedurals, you'll like it. There's some politics mixed in there. I try to have a human effect. Yeah, here's like the birth of, my first son, and then the birth of my, second and third. I interwove into my storylines. And my 3rd book is the first 10 years of my FBI career, starting with my first day at the FBI Academy, and then ending with basically the termination of the Unabomber case. My 4th book will be the second 10 years of my FBI career, DC Sniper, 9/11, Anthrax, a bunch of other cases in there.
Wow.
And then I'll go into some cases I worked in retirement too, which were kind of interesting. Even as a civilian, I've worked some interesting cases too, in this country as well as others.
Now let's talk about how we discovered we're related. It's a pretty amazing story. My late dad was abandoned at a hospital in Philadelphia right after he was born, and his mom gave a fake address, so the police were never able to track her down. She wrote her name as Margaret Orr, but we don't know if that was her real name or something she made up. So for most of my life, I had no idea about my background or anything about my dad's side of the family. I took a DNA test years ago and discovered I'm mainly Irish and Scottish. My skin is very sensitive, so it made sense if I even think about the sun, I'll get a sunburn. So that wasn't a big surprise. The big surprise came when I got a message from you in 2018, the day after my dad's 81st birthday, saying you thought we were related. This DNA website had compared my DNA test results to yours and sent us both a message saying we were definitely first cousins or maybe something even closer. While my dad was alive, I'm glad we got more DNA tests that would confirm that you were actually my uncle.
It totally blew my mind because I knew my dad was married at 30. He had 3 daughters, and then, surprise, 12 years later, I came along. As far as I know, he wasn't married before. I never asked my dad back in those days, hey, Dad, you have any other kids besides us 4? You know, you don't normally do that. He never volunteered that. My mom lived 10 years after my dad. She died in 1990. She never brought anything up to us. I was convinced at first, if you remember, Alan, that it was somehow my grandfather. He lived, I guess, until about the early 40s. I never met him. And maybe he somehow impregnated this woman of childbearing age. We don't know her exact age. I said, well, I guess my grandfather got around. He was a widower at the time. I got my son involved, all my sons. And he said, Dad, I'm looking at this stuff. Your dad is the father of this guy, Al Wolf, who I never even talked to or communicated with yet. I'm only communicating with you, Alan. I said, damn, you must be right. And we did the math with birth dates. He was not married at the time that he impregnated your grandmother, who we have no idea who she is. But it wasn't too much longer that he did marry my mom, and they had their first child, who was only about a few months younger than your dad. But he wasn't married. There was no indication of any adultery or cheating on my dad's part. But we have no idea if he ever even knew about this child.
And I'm guessing he didn't. That was a very different time when if a woman was having a baby on her own, it was probably very devastating. And so my theory is that my grandfather didn't know he got her pregnant. She knew he was getting married, so she couldn't even tell him. And then when she had the baby, she abandoned the baby in the hospital and thought, I'll move on with my life.
To her credit, she could have dropped your father off anywhere, and perhaps he never would have survived, and Alan, you wouldn't have been here.
I know. If she had gotten an abortion, I wouldn't be here. It's incredible to think about because she was in circumstances where everything was against her. She didn't tell the father, she was on her own, but she decided to leave her baby at the hospital. He was put into a Catholic orphanage in Philadelphia. He was adopted, and then eventually, here I am. So I'm thankful she made that choice. And I'm thankful my dad was able to meet his brother before he passed away.
My youngest sister, Marilyn, died about 12 years ago, the youngest of my 3 older sisters. And, they were great growing up, with them. I was kind of an only child. They got married when I was relatively young. And I always wanted a big brother, always wanted a big brother. Here I had one all these years, but never knew it.
Because of Jim's message, I discovered I have 2 aunts, many cousins, and many relatives I've yet to meet. My dad was thrilled to discover he had a brother. I'm just sad that he's not still with us. He died from cancer in August of 2020, but I'm so thankful to have Uncle Jim and the rest of that side of the family now in my life. This interview is sponsored by Navigating Hollywood, which encourages and equips entertainment professionals to live relationally and spiritually holistic lives by creating spaces for people who work in entertainment to meet others and grow. There are several online courses available. If you work in entertainment, I encourage you to check out the different courses at navigatinghollywood.org. Use the code PODCAST and your course is complimentary. You can also sign up to get updates about future courses, upcoming podcasts, and other opportunities on the site as well. Again, that's navigatinghollywood.org. Uncle Jim, I really appreciate you talking about all your life adventures and sharing your insights with us. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, you're the first family member who ever interviewed me on a podcast.
This is historic. Please follow us and leave us a review so others can discover this podcast. You can find our other shows, transcripts, and links to Jim's books, his website, and anything else we talked about and more at navigatinghollywood.org. I look forward to being with you next time.